So what we've been talking about is actually referred to as the hydrological cycle. So this is the idea that we can talk about water ending up in the oceans, and then through evaporation, it goes into the air. So let's put evaporation. And then it comes back and it forms clouds, and then it goes back to the land. And this would be precipitation. And this could be in the form of snow, it can be in the form of rain, it could be in the form of sleet, right? So ice. And as it comes from the land, it actually starts to flow over the land, right? So as it does that, it actually dissolves minerals. So you could ask yourself, why is the ocean salty? Why is it full of so many solutes? And it is because as the water flows across the land in rivers and streams, it travels with gravity, right? So it travels from high altitude to low altitude, and it picks up these minerals and then deposits them into the ocean. So this would be, for example, like runoff, right? And this is minerals getting dissolved. And then eventually it goes back to the ocean. So this is the hydrological cycle. So it would actually, I could put this and make it go back to the ocean that way. So it looks like a loop, it looks like a cycle. So one of the interesting things about this is that we can look at where water travels, right? So we can talk about what is called a watershed. So a watershed would be that area of land that is served by all of the streams that come into that land. So we could talk about, say, for example, the Columbia River watershed, right? So the Columbia River is picking up water from all these other rivers that are flowing into it. And eventually the Columbia River is going to end up at the ocean, right? And it's going to dump that water back into the ocean. So another interesting thing about this is that sometimes with excessive irrigation and agriculture, we sometimes get soil becoming too mineralized, like too salty. And if the soil becomes too salty and too mineralized, then the plants have a hard time growing there. They have a hard time picking up the water. Plants need generally fresh water, just like we do, in order to grow, because they have a hard time picking up the salt water. Okay, so we can talk about where it flows, and then we can talk about, like in the United States, there's an interesting phenomenon, which is called the Continental Divide. And so when we look at an image of our landscape, we can see, oops, that's not the one I wanted. We can see, we'll talk about that one in a second. This image right here, this shows the continental divides, and what this describes is the direction that our rivers flow. So for example, when we look at this red line, right, that means that all of the rivers on that side are going to go to the Pacific Ocean. When we look at the continental divide on the eastern, all of the rivers on this side are going to go to the Atlantic Ocean. And then you'll notice something really interesting about our area. We have basins. What is a Great Basin? That is where the water starts to accumulate, right? It isn't flowing to the ocean. So we have this area called the Great Basin, and it collects all the water from the snowmelt. And one example of this would be that other image I just showed here. This actually shows the Colorado River. So the Colorado River is shown right here, right? And what it's eventually going to do is it's eventually going to dump into the Gulf of Mexico. But it is a super important part of this desert landscape because this is where we get our water. So if you look at Phoenix, if you look at what happens here in Las Vegas, if you look at Lake Mead, if you've ever been to Lake Mead, you know that that is a giant reservoir. There's a huge dam called the Hoover Dam, right? And so by damming this and then taking out and withdrawing from this water, what we see is that by the time the Colorado River actually gets to the Gulf of Mexico, it is generally dried up. So it actually never makes it because we have used up all that water. So realizing the significance of fresh water, we have to have fresh water, right, as a civilization, and realizing that it's not something that we have unlimited resources of. Only 1% of the fresh water is actually available for us to use. And so we need to make sure that it is cared for, right? And it is regulated, and the use of it is appropriated in a very controlled manner, specifically because as the climate changes, we can predict that precipitation patterns are going to change. And then therefore there is going to be more droughts, and there's going to be a greater need for water. And so this might mean that we need to limit our use of water for certain things, like, for example, flushing toilets or taking showers, taking baths, irrigating our lawns, having fountains in the desert, right? All of those things tend to be wasteful of fresh water. So we'll talk more about the uses of fresh water and some of the misuses of fresh water.